Hello and welcome to Modernizing Massive Amounts of Content in the Shortest Possible Time. In this session, you will learn how to prioritize content for modernization, how to drive cost efficiency through process maturity, and how to go beyond updating content to updating learner engagement. With us today is Arun Prakash. He is the Chief Learning Strategist at Infopro Learning. With more than 2 decades of learning industry experience, Arun is a seasoned learning specialist and an expert in envisaging and implementing effective out-of-the-box training solutions, collaborative learning networks, and knowledge management systems. He has experience consulting large corporations and diverse audience, as well as setting up and managing learning organizations. He has undertaken P&L responsibilities, planning, and financial analysis for many learning organizations and has been able to successfully connect learning effectiveness to business goals and establishing training ROI. As the Chief Learning Strategist at Infopro Learning, he is responsible for working closely with key and large accounts in understanding their business goals and subsequently aligning the goals with measurable learning outcomes and learning solutions. So let's please welcome Arun to the session. Arun, I'll bring up your first slide. The floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Melissa, and good morning, good afternoon, good evening to all my friends and colleagues from the L&D world. Nice to be part of this webinar, and I'm excited to run a small session with you on this, right? Excellent. Mel, I see that we are far into this. I think we got to go back to slide number 1, please. I will do that myself. Boom, 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 boom. Mel, I somehow see. Okay. Okay, that's good. Thank you very much. Yes, so once again, welcome. And this is about modernizing existing content that you have, massive amounts of content. And how is it possible to do that in the shortest possible time and making sure that it is efficient, is effective, and in the whole process, we also have a process to update it going in the future. So that's the whole idea. And please feel free to write in your questions as I speak, and Mel will help me in reading those out, and I can definitely be, definitely be able to answer those as we go forward. Right? Thank you very much. Let me go further. So let me start with a quick poll. Melissa, I would request you to pull that poll in. So the question is, why do you feel that there's a need to modernize in your organization, right? And it could be a variety of those, right? It could be mergers and acquisitions that have just gone through. It is some kind of a rebranding that you're going through. You are using some data technology. You need to move into some newer technologies. Other industry factors, right? And the content is dated. It is changed over the period of time. Or other factors, which is not listed here as well, right? So a lot of options here. So I will give us ourselves a moment before I stop this poll and see how this goes. Yes, I can see coming in. Okay, very good. Uh, 20. Okay, I think that's good. If you could publish the polls, please, it'll be really good. Actually, it should have been, and I see some of the questions and chats are coming in. There may be multiple of these factors. It should have been actually a checkbox item rather than a radio button. I do agree, and there may be multiple of these options. So if you see here, majority of the people did say about dated content, and one person did talk about a merger and acquisition. All of these are valid, and many of these, they come in different importance. And in some cases, it is a merger and acquisition. Like there's one person that has said this, and it is now important to change everything, brand everything into a new mode. and rebranding is in itself a whole thing because they have gone through, a new change, a marketing, a new life to the company itself. Flash, I was expecting more about the Flash and data technologies and stuff like that, but it still is a subsequent, a substantial percentage there. Dated content. This is always the biggest issue. The content gets dated, and that is where the problem is, and that is where we always feel the need to update the content as we go forward, right? Others, of course, are there. And then, of course, there are some chats are coming up. There are compliance regulations. There are government regulations. There are things that just come in. It could be the Affordable Care Act, or it could be a new insurance policy, or a federal government regulation that's just come in, which impacts everybody. And all of those. So all of those are important factors. So all of you are right, and all of these, there's no right or wrong answers here, and this is really where we really feel the need for modernizing the content. Let's go ahead and look at an example. Actually, I know you come from different industries and varied organizations, but I took an example here from the insurance industry. From our research, we did figure out that on an average, about 1,000 hours of training is what insurance companies would have developed in the last 5 years. And there's a reason why I said I took the 5 years, because in subsequent slides I'll talk about the importance of these 5 years as well. But in the last 5 years, you're talking about 1,000 hours, and 1,000 hours is pretty much worth $18 million that's been invested in making those programs. Now, this includes a variety of number of hours from different people. Like for example, it could be, in this particular case, the subject matter experts have put in about 18,000 hours, which in itself, comes to about 2.7 million, dollars, right? And then there are L&D developers. It could be instructional designers. It could be, developers. It could be media artists, and all of them put together. Another, 101,000 hours, which accounts about 8.1 million dollars. Similarly, instructors, I mean, they would have spent a ton of time because they've been, sometimes curating content, sometimes, running the content, taking the training programs and stuff like that. 67,000 hours, more than 67,000 hours, adding to about 2.7 million. And then another, from the management standpoint, running this entire show, most of your people here would have been very familiar with that. 34,000 plus hours there. The whole of it is about $18 million. And the interesting fact to notice here is that if you look at the 5 years and now as on date, these organizations would be using only 50% of what they have developed over the last 5 years. Right? What that means is that $9 million pretty much has gone down. Great. That's a substantial, that's a phenomenal amount if you look at it. And it's got a variety of reasons why they're not used, and that's exactly why we are here to talk about and how we can maximize. Some of them may be not amenable to reuse, which is completely possible. I mean, there's a course, there is a program that you have, and the content has completely changed. And of course, you cannot reuse because that is not relevant anymore because you have changed, right? So, of course, some percentage would definitely go out, but a substantial percent should be reusable. Otherwise, there is not much of a growth and much of reusability and much of ROI, right? But the good news is that you're not alone, and I'm pretty sure you have this issue, and there are two distinct ways in which we can make this choice. One is the simplest way, but is the most expensive way. You just ignore everything that you have and create the new content. So whenever you have a need, you just jump in and create a new content, right? I mean, you need a content and you need a content right now. How best to use it? Just go ahead and create new content. The only problem with that is you're just adding to those $18 million and you're not really reusing any. And the percentage of reuse just goes down and down, right? So over a period of time, you have massive amounts left and none of them are reused, and you have also repetitions, you have redundant stuff. So you have a course and you have the same course in 4 different formats and in 4 different ways it's been put forward to the learners, and learners have now a confusion what to take and how to take. So typically you have an LMS, it's already in LMS, And then you have another course in LMS. So now it's up to them to choose what they would want to learn and how they want to learn. It only creates confusion unless we really manage the content, how it's distributed and how it is given on. The other option is to not just ignore, but then evaluate what you have and then decide what to ignore and then create new content wherever is required. So and that is the modernize part. Now that is what we will focus on as we go forward. And this is now from here on we will go deeper into what modernize means, what are the steps into we need to get into, and so on and so forth. Any questions, please feel free to ask as we go forward. Um, let's move on. Now, from what we just discussed, let's go a little deeper and say what are the many reasons that are there apart from the ones that we just talked about in polls, from a content, from a learning asset perspective, right? One of the biggest items is what we call as content inaccuracies. Now, this is what came up, and that is what was the highest, or the majority of the people who said that the content needs to be updated, right? Uh, the content is simply not usable, right? Realities change, business realities change. The content has been updated. The systems that you use have changed. So whether it's a hardware or a software or machinery that you use has changed, which means the photographs, the representations that you have in the courses have changed. The way in which it's been taught has changed. There's a new system that's been rolled out. The older one is no more applicable. All of those things. So the content inaccuracies is a big thing, right? And then, of course, in the existing content itself, over time, you also uncover some errors. Oh, we had written that. Actually, it's not exactly like that. We would like to update that a little bit here or there, right? And this actually, these starts creeping in by the end of first year. So once you've created the learning program, by year one, you would have content inaccuracies creeping in, right? And then by the end of time, year two, the design and the format, and which necessarily means the graphic user interface or the experience has changed. Some of them may be really, really major. Like for example, when Apple came out with their interface, where minimal help, there is pretty much no help in iPhones or any of those devices. It was a major change, and that meant that without a help on how to use things, people can figure out, make it so intuitive that people are able to use it. So it's a different way of looking things, and it's a big change. But there are smaller change in which you understand that it's not. You look at something and you see, oh, this is not contemporary. Like for example, a lot of realist white space on the screen. Now that is in fashion. That's in mode. The kind of icons that he used, the kind of smaller graphics and the aesthetics of those are changed. Like for example, Google came with there's this material design and it has a particular way of putting things together, right? And there's a minimalistic design. So there are design aesthetics that are also changing. And these are important, really, really important, not only because it is looking old, but also in starting year two, year three, year four, there are newer people, newer generation of people who are coming in and taking these training programs. And the moment they see something which is not from what they used to, then there is a problem, and then they don't get you don't get that much engagement which you would ideally want from those people. There is also, other changes like, ILTs, when it's a combination of content and outdated design and formats. The format of the training program today is Classroom. There is absolutely nothing wrong in Classroom. But the reality is that Classroom has its own downsides, and there are many Classroom trainings which can be completely digitized and can be run digitally. Not to say that some of them can be 100%, but some of them could also be, if not 100%, 70%, 80%, 60%, whatever. But a majority of it can be digitized, and that's very important to understand as well. Then by year three, you see that the business realities have changed. I mean, these are average numbers, of course. I mean, the business reality is changing, saying the market realities have changed. There is, a reorganization in the company, and pretty much nowadays, every 3 to 5 years, there is a reorg in almost all companies, right? There is structural changes. There are new people coming in, new management coming in, and then so on and so forth. The realities of business is also changing because the technology is changing fast, and that is really driving a lot of businesses and the realities that they exist in today. So older training programs may just not align with the business needs. So they might still be a training program. People may still be taking it, but the applicability of that training program in real life would have really gone down by year three. So you need to look at that as well. Then you have the the learner demographics. Now, there's been cliched. Much has been talked about the millennials. Much has been talked about the baby boomers going out and new people coming in. But the reality is, now I'm more and more convinced that it is millennials is one problem, but it's also a problem of the existing Gen Xers as well, because they're now also getting used to newer forms of engagement, right? Engagement, even if you look at in your own companies, depending on what you use, engagement in different kinds of collaborative environments, the experience is very, very different. So, for example, yeah, you might be using Slack today, or you might be using Teams today, or you might be using Yammer today. All of these are now pretty much are becoming standards in organization for internal communication, and they pretty much live in there. So if I have a question, if earlier I would have walked up to my colleague and asked that question, now I would just simply put it in one of these tools and I get an answer. So that is also learning. So we need to figure out what can be really achieved in that kind of an environment, and why do we really need to have a training program, right? So there are various ways of looking at it. But overall, the demographics changing is forcing us to look at the learning program that we have today and the methodologies. In fact, there is a very interesting report from Burson from Deloitte, and that says that the new modern learner is so distracted, it's practically impossible to retain the attention for more than a very small specific time. So how do you make sure that learning is now smaller? So that directly connects to the demographics of people as well. And the last one, number five, by year number five, you have all the digital formats even outmoded. I mean, you have newer versions, newer systems, right? Which are coming up, which pretty much replaces the older one, right? I see a question here. Yes, I can share with you the report that I just mentioned about Burson from Deloitte. Once we upload the takeaways, I can give Melissa that as well so that she can use it. So outmoded digital formats, that one of the big examples is Flash. And we said that there are many people moving from Flash. Flash was, if you remember how Flash came in, it was the de facto, plugin, which means many of the browsers came in with Flash built into it, right? So it was what is called the standard plugin, right? Though it was a third-party tool. Now that Flash is nowhere to be seen. It's sunsetting by end of next year. It'll be completely gone, right? What that means is that there are new realities have come into play. And now we have other things like Storyline or Captivate, or all of those things are there, right? But they are also having their own problems. Like, for example, if you look at Storyline, right, we need to figure out whether Storyline is the right format for you or not. We need to figure out if this Captivate is the right format for you or not. I will talk about that in a little while. But the just the matter here is that the media in which these learning digital formats were delivered before, digital learning was delivered before, is now getting outdated. And there are more and more LMS standards coming in. In fact, they're moving away from LMS. Now, LMSs are not very critical at all, and there are other MIS tools and internet tools that are doing pretty much the same thing and much more than what an LMS did. So LMS is slowly, I can see that it's reached the peak, and it's now slowly going down. and over a period of time, that will have a different avatar as and it'll be completely not what we know of it as it is today. Um, Going forward, we're saying that so there are three areas based on all of these that we must focus on. The first and foremost is the content and instructional strategy, right? This is where you make content updates. Here is where you reorganize your content. Here is where you figure out whether it should be smaller, it should be modular, can it be reused. This is where you figure out how can we, is there a way we can tag them so that we can reuse as much as possible, right? This is where when we are modernizing it, make sure that it is now available for localization or accessibility of any or any of those sorts. In fact, here is where the subject matter experts play a large role because they're the people who would say, you know what, the content it has to change. I am running these training programs, but unfortunately, I'm using my own experience from here because I know that this slide is not correct, that slide is not correct. There's a lot of input that can come in from those people, right? And then tagging is very very important. The contextual tagging, the meta tagging is very very important, and it's typically ignored. But from a content modernization perspective, it is an important aspect. And if you do that every 5 years or every year when you're updating your content, you can minimize the wastage from that perspective. Then you have the asset and media. That's where you look at the design of it. That's where you look at the media of it, the graphical user experience and graphical user interface of the product. That is where you look at what kind of media do we need to use. I mean, the third bullet you see here, rich media versus media amenable to multiple delivery forms. It's a big thing. Rich media was there. We can still use rich media. There's nobody stopping you from using rich media, but making sure it's amenable to multiple delivery formats is also important. So making sure making sure that these numbers are the delivery formats are now available in multiple devices is important. So it cannot be a graphic, and if it's a JPEG graphic, it will just go to shrink, and then the layout has to be looked at, and that is where the technology piece comes into the third part of it, where you are looking at the readiness of this tool, readiness of this media into different devices, right? Which is the mobile readiness, cross-browser availability, device independence, and stuff like that. And that's where the rapid development tool come in. Now, here's a very interesting thing that I would want to go a little deeper. We would need the way you choose the technology piece is based on, there are many ways, but one of the ways you can do that is by saying, hey, what is the shelf life of a particular content, right? The thumb rule is that if the shelf life is short, and if you know that this content is going to get outdated soon, it is better to go ahead and create it using some kind of a rapid authoring environment, right? On the other hand, if you think the shelf life of a particular thing is going to be long, I would rather go with something which is sustainable for a longer duration, like a native HTML. Again, you can say, oh, I can create using a storyline, and it still would be HTML5 output. Now, yes, of course you can, but then the problem with that is today's storyline may not be 100% say mobile responsive, right? And tomorrow everything would need to be responsive, which means if you go with storyline today for a longer shelf life content, you would understand that this is not going to sustain for in a longer duration. You would need to change very soon, even if you've created using storyline, right? So one of the examples is that we've been working with one of these government contractors. They are into making, submarines. Now, submarines have not changed, right? Pretty much. So there is a large amount of content that is, static. That content is not changing. Of course, there are some parts that are changing, and for them, they need a shorter shelf life. But overall, these things are pretty much standard. So the concepts that they cover as part of the submarine training could be, pretty much done in an HTML in a way that is absolutely accessible over a variety of devices, right? Then you have the SCORM and XAPI support. It's even now, my experience says most of the people are creating content which is SCORM, 1.2. I mean, they have not even moved to the higher versions of SCORM. That is because it is a quick way of doing it, and that is because most of the rapid authoring tools support it, and that is because of the fact that they have not been able to leverage the benefits from other things like XAPI, and they are stuck with the LMS that they have. There's a multiple reasons for that, but then you have to think ahead and say, how do we learn? How do these learners learn as we go forward? And depending on that, we should be choosing, what kind of SCORM or API, XAPI compliance we need to go. And the last one I want to touch upon is the collaborative piece. That's also very, very important. I talked about Yammer, I talked about Teams, I talked about Slack, and other collaborative environments like that. It is now part and parcel of our daily work. Part and parcel of daily workforce and their daily access tools and systems. It is as important as you're accessing your email. I mean, email is something that you don't miss out anywhere, and it's that's something that you're always connected with. These are equally connected. Phones are now accessed. Team meetings are on these kind of environments. So making sure that the collaborative platform implementation, if you have one or don't have one, I mean, integrating it with that is also considered, and it's a very important aspect to it. Now, before I move forward and I show you the process of how we modernize, and before I show you some of the tools that I use and some of the tools that has been very effective in modernizing these content, let me run one more poll, um, and let me see how you think. This is about what do you think about what is the percentage of learning that you have developed in the past 5 years is still current? I mean, what do you think? I mean, if you have done some assessment, you would have some numbers. If you have not done any assessments, you can go with one of those D and E, the last two options. Um, I'll give it a moment for people to just put these in, give their responses. Okay, we'll stop. And can we broadcast results? So as you see here, this is very in line with the 50% number I was talking about earlier, that about more than 50% is still current is what people think, and 25 to 50% is about 28%. So about one third is always, saying that only 50% or less than 50% is what is current, right? And of course, there are. I completely understand the people who've mentioned who have chosen the last two options. And it is very valid because there is so much content is available there, and we can only have a gut feel saying, you know what, I think the majority is correct, or I think the majority is not correct. That's all we can say, right? And this is very, very valid, and that is very true as well. And that is the reason, for me to move on to the next slide. Thank you, Melis. The modernized process. So the first part of the modernized process is the content asset inventory. I will go into detail and I will give you some quick ways, some tools to quickly, do your content, asset inventory. I will talk about that in a moment. Once you have the inventory, you know what you're dealing with. Unless you know what you're dealing with, I don't recommend jumping into it. In fact, there are many cases where people say, you know what, I have this one program that I need to modernize. And they are looking at that one program pretty much in isolation, right? uh, There are many cases where people have come in and said, you know what, we have to just relook at everything, right? Everything that I have. That's also a good thing, an ambitious thing, but we have to look at the reality. So we need to figure out what is the scope of work that we're really targeting. That's what content asset inventory is, and I'll show you an example of how we can do it quickly. The second part is we need to create a strategy. We need to look at what we need to, once we have the list of content on our learning program that need to be touched upon, how do we go into details and how do we create a recommendation or even a prototype if required to make sure that we have a solid strategy before we go ahead and start the modernization. While the topic of today's discussion is to how to do this, fast and quick. But the reality is that let us not jump into it immediately as well. I mean, let us do a little stock taking before we get into it, and that's the reason why the strategy is very important. And make sure that you explore and discover what needs to be done, and then come up with a recommendation. And then the moment what needs to be modernized, then things change. Then you have to figure out there are 3 4 categories in which you can go, right? You can talk about the long term category, the short term category, I think long term as in long shelf life category, the short shelf life category. Some of the courses can be acquired from the market. It would be cheaper to do that. Just buy them out. There are some courses which can be updated. There's some courses that needs complete new development because it doesn't exist today. And here is where for part two and part three, I have seen more of many companies going and asking for help from specialized L&D organizations. But the content asset inventory is something that I recommend that you do it yourself, and that is what would give you the scope of what we are really dealing with. And once that is done, then we can get in, and that could be an input to the even the consultants who will be working with you to make sure that you know how you get the strategy and how you modernize this. Right? Let me go further. So the first step is called the content asset inventory. Now, here, what we're trying to do is that we are looking at all the legacy content that we have, that falls into the gamut, and say, what do I need to do with this? Do I need to do anything to do it? Do I need to even touch them? Am I opening a can of worms here? Who do I need to get in touch with? And all of those. That is very, very important. Please do understand that there are many factors playing in modernization within a company. The company might say that yes, we need to modernize this, and organization might say that. But it is also very important to understand there are constraints. The constraints could be that people. The constraints could be budgets. The constraints could be you don't have people. You don't have people enough to just do anything about it because they are a small 3 people team or a 4 people team. The subject matter experts are just not there, right? And all of those, I mean, they're just not available. So let me show you a quick thing to do with the first cut content asset inventory. Let me try to share my screen. Just give me 1 second. And please let me know when you can see my screen. Yep, I think you can see the screen here. So this is a step one where you do a high level inventory analysis. This is a very, very quick tool, and I will share this tool with you and you can use them. Basically, what you do here is that you just put the existing training name, right? The existing training name. And you write a brief description on what that training is. Then you write the modality of it as it exists today. It could be classroom, it could be a video, it could be just a PDF document, it could be an e-learning or a web-based training, it could be a podcast, it could be whatever the current modality is, right? You just write the modality. And you also write a seat time. So it could be, if it's a classroom, it is a 4-day classroom training program. Or e-learning, it is a 2-hour or 1-hour e-learning program. Or it's a 3-minute video that is there, and so on, right? And just write whether it is current, It is yes, no, maybe. And what that means when you say yes, we are saying that there are absolutely no changes required. It can be used as is, as in we don't need to modernize it. We just can, we can fit in somewhere, right? No, which means absolutely dated and had to be retired. This is the most important thing. This is actually going to get your total number of assets that need to be more modernized, considerably, lesser, right? Now, so it's something smaller that you can handle better. Then you have maybe, and that's where you go the required but needs to be updated kind of a scenario, right? And once you do that, you will have all of these training programs written here that falls in the gamut, and then you can create a summary of saying, okay, how many hours of e-learning do we have today, right? And of the total duration, and then we're saying the number of maybes. We're only looking at the maybes. Please remember, no is dated and retired. Maybe is where we need to modernize. Yes is absolutely no changes, right? So we're only calculating the maybes here. So we say we've got 7 maybes, and that adds up to 15 hours of learning, uh, right? For example, right? So 7 e-learning modules and totaling about 15 hours. 5 videos totaling about 2 hours. 10 classroom programs adding up to about 65 hours of training program. This will give you a very clear idea on the total duration. If you just add this up, it will tell you what is the duration of learning program we're trying to look at. This will very easily give you a lot of information, right? One, the scope of the work. Two, an approximate budget if I need to touch on any of these, right? So you can, you're all coming from the L&D background. You have an idea on what, an hour of learning program would take to create. And you have some numbers in your mind. You can do a rough calculation and say, oh, okay, if you're going to do this, it's going to be this much. Do we have the budget? If I don't have the budget, don't even start it, right? Let us first figure out whether we can do it, or we go back and say what can change and what cannot change, and what can there be more maybes which can live for a little longer before I touch it for a phase two, right? And so on. So do that high level inventory analysis. This I recommend that whether you do it in house or with a consultant or a consultant company, you do this immediately. I mean, once you do this, you will be much more in control. Once you do this, and once you're saying, okay, at a high level, I think this is what we require, and everybody agrees to it, you go to the 1B here and then you do a detailed analysis. But now you are doing only for the maybes. So all the numbers that you just talked about here are the only things, only content that you're actually expanding here. Now, what you're doing here is going deeper. You're going in deeper here, saying, okay, name of the training, what's the training modality as it stands today, what's the seat time, what is the focus area of the training, what is the audience profile. Now, these two are very important. The focus area and the audience profile, these are, the way it is created right now may have a different focus area and may have a different audience profile, because at some point in time somebody said this can be used for these kind of audiences as well, so it got reused. It's always good to check, and realign about the audience profile here. Then you go ahead and look at the location of these assets and whether you have access to it. This is a very, very interesting thing. In many of the cases, when I go after, when I consult people, they don't know where this course exists. They only know that this course exists in our LMS, right? Beyond that, they have no idea. Where the source files are. Does the source files exist or not? If I need to, who do I need to get in touch with? I mean, will I get access to it? Do I need to contact IT for it? And so on and so forth. The location of assets and access is an important thing, and very closely competing with it is the source files. In many cases, because it was created 4 or 5 years ago, because it was created by a third-party company who helped us, and suddenly we have no source file. So you might have to recreate what is required, right? Any other supporting material on that particular learning program that exists. So which means, I have seen that if it's a classroom training program and the subject matter experts are training, are conducting these trainings, I have seen that they have their own small cheat sheets. and which they kind of use to make the content relevant and current while they are conducting these classes. And this is really, really helpful, right? Because that is content that you can put in while you are updating these content, right? The key stakeholders name. Who are we not getting in touch with, and what's that person's role? It could be an SME, it could be a business lead, it could be somebody else, but we need to know who that stakeholder is, right? And then if there's any recommendation from the stakeholder, many a time when you talk to the stakeholder, you would figure out that, you know what, I don't think you need to touch this training program at all because while it may seem outdated, we have figured out a way to do it, and here is our way of doing it. We don't need any training program at all on that. Completely possible, because understand that many things which needed training early, now because in the last 3, 4, 5 years, the technology has so much been intrusive that it is part of life, and you don't need training for that, and they just can use it, and you don't need to create a separate training program for that because they've been using it and they know how to use it. It's intuitive, and so on and so forth. So no need for the training program, right? Or you might say that, okay, there is this new cheat sheet that we're using. Why don't you incorporate that? Or we say, our people, we have a classroom training program. Unfortunately, these are all salespeople. They are all people who, are road warriors. And this classroom training program is just not effective because I can't get these people into a classroom. So the recommendation may be something else and not a classroom training program. And any other remarks you put in. Now, once you put this, you got the very high level analysis here in terms of scope and budget and stuff like that. It'll get narrowed down further with this thing. You have one look at it and you slice and dice the data that you see here. You will have a very clear understanding of what you are up against, the amount of content that you need to work on, and the amount of the money that it's going to need, and the timeline when this is going to be up. You will get an approximate idea from these two sheets. Once you do this, then you go into a detailed sheet, right? And which is where you have to figure out the recommendation part of it, which is, and let me go back to the presentation. Can I go back to the presentation, please? So that is the first part one. That's the content asset inventory. And now when you move to the next step, which is step two, which is the modernizing strategy itself, that is where we now need to do a deep dive in the content saying what I need to update. Now here you need more information that you need to gather, and you need more information, more time to engage with subject matter experts and people and stakeholders who would help you, change these and improve these and so on and so forth. This is where many organizations look out for consultants and other partner companies to get this done because we understand very soon that we don't have the bandwidth because there are not enough people in the team who can do it, because you need to really chase the subject matter experts. You need to conduct interviews. You might need to conduct surveys. You might do a lot of other things that you need to do to get more information. Let me also show you an example of this document. This Excel sheet I'm not going to share with you, but it can give you an idea on how we do it, how I do it with most of my customers. Can we get to help? Yeah, I'll share my screen now once again. This is what we use, something called a Discover Explore toolkit. What it has in the bottom, you can see there's some general questions that we answer, that we ask our stakeholders. Then some of them are related to the business need, some of them on training needs, some of them on content, technology, branding, change management, what happens post training, and so on and so forth. So all of these different tabs are very, very important. And depending on the need, depending on the scope, and depending on what we're covering, we ask a subset of this question or the customized version of these questions to different people, right? And these questions give us an idea on what should the new training look like. Now, this is very important to understand. We should understand how the new training should look like. It is not saying, oh, it was ILT and just let us just make it e-learning and things will change. Well, you would spend the money, you would make it as an e-learning, but it would not have the engagement. It would not be part of a bigger picture. It would not be part of a learning journey that you've created. It would still be standalone, and very soon, within a year at best, these would be completely outdated and nobody would be using it. And that is one of the reasons many people do come to us, and I've experienced of this, saying that people are not engaged. We did so much, spend so much money in creating this fantastic AR and VR program, and it's very engaging. But even then, the result has not been very good. Even though the engagement went up, the result has been not very good. We need to understand the master process, the master technique in which master learning program that this is part of, and then ask these different questions on general questions on on training needs, business and training needs, content, different kinds of contents, but technology, what kind of technologies would you like to use? Why would they want to use, and so on and so forth. For example, you might just go ahead and say that, oh, okay, let us make it mobile, but nobody has seen whether the company has a mobile policy or not, right? So you make all the investment in making it mobile. It is a little future ready, but unfortunately, nobody using it mobile because your organization is prohibiting people from using their own mobile device to access these learning programs. Or it could be your learning management system is not compatible with mobile devices. So these courses just don't run. So you're creating something which is not going to be used, and so on and so forth. So you have to go through variety of different areas to understand how to handle these different areas, and then this is what we call the discover and explore. Go deeper and try to understand. Can I get back to the presentation, please, Mel? Mel, you there? I cannot see the screen yet.
Okay, I've brought you, well, we're back in seeing the PowerPoint. You might have to exit out of the screen sharing to get back to Adobe.
uh, it does not give me any other option like that. I don't have any screen that's shared.
Do you see the Adobe Connect icon in your system tray?
Yes, I click on it and it opens up the Adobe Connect window, but it does not show me the slide. Okay, I don't know the reason for it, but
How about now?
no, I still see I see the top left icons of my audio and the raise hand, and everything else is a black screen.
Okay, let's.
Never mind. Let's move on. I know which screen that you're referring to. You right now, I believe you have the step two screen up, right?
Yes, I'm happy to drive for you. Step 2B is on.
Okay, very good. So step 2B is where you create the recommendation. That's where you create the documentation of the program, right? That is very, very important. Now, once you do all of this, you need to have a report that needs to come out, and that would say that here is a key, here is what we have done. Here is what our approach was, and by doing all of these things, here is what we recommend as a learning strategy, and here is what we recommend as a delivery methodology, and here is what we recommend as an implementation methodology, right? It would cover the plans, the budgets, the timelines, and so on and so forth, right? All of those. Once you have this thing, and if, as you understand, what you're doing two things here, you are looking at the current situation, you have looked at the desired situation, and you come up with a recommendation for it. That's what you do, right? And typically, uh, if you have an L&D team large enough to do it, undertake this internally, please go ahead and do that. If you have shorter, I would recommend you go out and work with an organization who can help you in doing this. Moving forward on the next slide, that is step three, which is modernized development. Um, I would quickly run that through as well. This is where, based on the recommendations, you would say, how do I do it? And some of them you buy, right? It is available in the market. Some of them you say, and that is because as part of modernization, you understand that there is an existing course which is completely retired now, but we need a replacement for it. And if we need a replacement for it, it's easier to just buy a course from outside and not create anything. You also may decide that I need to develop a new course completely, which does not exist, which will replace two courses that exist today. That is also a choice that you have to make. And then you also need to make a choice saying that, okay, are we going to do it internally? Are we going to in-source? In-source is where you hire temporarily one or two people from the market and then work with them to create the program because you only have a short need for those people. You don't need to recruit the person, but a short need, or it's a larger engagement. You would rather want to outsource it to somebody to work with them as well, right? And then, of course, the off the shelf, whether it is larger shelf life, shorter shelf life, all of these things taken into consideration. This is the entire modernized development program. Of course, it goes through the 4 or 5 stages that we show here, and the easy way to handle it is to work in an agile model. If the content, I appreciate the ADDIE model. There is nothing wrong in an ADDIE model, but the objective here is to make sure that we quickly modernize these content. If we don't quickly modernize, by the time we modernize these content, especially when we have large content, it would be time to do the next set of modernization. We have to quickly do it so that we stay relevant. We quickly do it so that we don't have to do that every, and if we have to keep updating those, but the process doesn't need to be a large exercise like this every second year, right? Once you do like this, and once all these courses are made in a particular way, it is easier for people to update it as we go forward as well. And the process for that as well should be in place by the time the modernization process is over. I have, going forward, I have a few examples of some things that we had done in the past. I have some screenshots put in together. Melissa, if you could go to the next slide, which says modernize, and the slide after that, which says ILT to WBT.
Yep, we are there.
Thank you very much. So there's an example where you had an existing course, and this course was linear content. It was not very interactive because it was pretty much slides, PowerPoint slides put together into an e-learning mode, so to speak, right? They did not. It was classroom training. And these are conceptual stuff. And when it's conceptual stuff, it's easy for us to move that into a web-based training. Um, but one other thing that I just want to, side digression from here, at a very high level, all the content that you have, all the learning program that you have, you can divide them into two categories. One category is the knowledge, and the second category is the skill. At that high level, and knowledge is where you are making sure that you're teaching concepts, and skill is where there is some performance improvement is expected at the end of the day, right? Knowledge typically at a Kirkpatrick level is 1 and 2, and skills are beyond level 2 of Kirkpatrick to get you some connect there. And everything which actually falls under knowledge, you can pretty much have self-study digital content. The Anything which is more skill related, you can have digital content, but sometimes you might need a face to face. So, for example, you have a program on communication, right? On communication or negotiation or something that is behavioral and stuff like that. There are digital methods that is available, like role play and other stuff like that is available. But sometimes you might say, okay, you know what, a workshop is really required. Or in the manufacturing segment, you really need to engage with that particular tool to do something. You would want to do that. So that differentiation. This particular example is a simple conversion from IL to WBT, and suddenly you would see that it is now self-study. It is now more engaging. It is more colorful. It is more it will help in retaining the content better. If I go to the next slide, which says Flash to HTML5, this is a very common one. Here, it was Flash, and we moved into HTML5. This is not using. They can. This example here is not using a rapid authoring environment, but you can also use a rapid authoring environment as a like a Storyline 360 or a Captivate or Camtasia or many of them. There are even LCMS like Xylem and stuff like that, which we can use to create HTML5 content as output going forward. Then the other example which we have is WBT to interactive WBT. You might have WBTs created today, which may be very non-engaging, very slow, very drab. You can always move them and make it engaging using and breathe a new life into it with content which is more which has more media, more attractive media, and so on and so forth. And the last one that I want to talk about is video to interactive video, and that one is very interesting. But you might have videos, and the videos are long because the content is long, and unfortunately the attention span of a learner is not more than 3 minutes. If it is going more than 3, 4, 5 minutes or 10 minutes, you need to make it engaging, and that is where you add engagement into that video and make it interactive. You can ask pop quizzes in between. You can add a collaborative environment next to it where people can chat and understand. Add searchability into a video. And so on and so forth, right? So that's another example of video interactive video. I just wanted to show you a few examples on what could be a modernizing from an asset perspective, not from a holistic perspective that we have already talked about. We are almost at the bottom of the hour and end of this program. I would take a pause and I would take any questions if you have. Now you can move to the last slide, which says thank you and thank you very much for your attention. Questions? Melissa, you would have to help me. I can't see the screens. You'd have to read it out for me.
We don't really have any questions that have come in. Nolan's been on also from Infopro Learning and helping with some of those questions. I do have some people typing. Let's see what comes in here. Oh, there's just saying there it's a great webinar.
Thank you very much.
A lot of great information. And we are at the, we're only a couple minutes. Okay, here we go. What is a typical budget? This came from Jim Selner. Jim, are you asking a budget to do this sort of thing? Is that what you're asking, Jim? To build. Okay. Oh, no. Let's see what.
The typical budget to build
No,
something?
no, sorry. I was mixing them up. What is a typical. Okay. He's saying Jennifer asked a better question. So are you guys asking what's the budget to do this process? Is that what you're asking?
I think they're asking if we were to modernize 25 hours of training content, what would that cost be? Am I understanding that question correctly, Jim and Jennifer?
I think so, yeah. Yes, they're saying yes.
Okay, okay, great. So unfortunately, being the consulting company that we are, we can't answer any questions simply. And Arun can probably answer it more specifically. But the whole point of creating a program like this was to try and shrink the cost of developing a massive amount of content versus developing one custom course. And we just did this exercise with a company down in Texas, and they asked us a similar question. And what we ended up with was 3 answers. We said, if all you're looking to do is change content, or sorry, it was a Flash to HTML5. We said, if all you're looking to do is regular Flash to HTML5, the cost is going to be X. But if you need to do Flash to HTML5 plus content changes, it's going to be Y. And then if you also want design changes, it's going to be Z. Now, as you can tell, it starts to add up as you get more and more and more complex. So I can't give you a great answer, with the exception to say that the rule of thumb that we always say is it should be drastically lower than developing anything new, because within this process, if you have 25 hours, we try to create a series of 2 to 3, let's say, redesignable templates that once we do the bulk work up front to try to standardize that, at that point it's just kind of a rip and replace job. So no set pricing, but as you've seen from Arun, we have very extensive calculators to determine what the cost is. If you want to send me details, I'd be happy to price on that.
That was a great example, Nolan. Thank you so much. And we are over time,
Very
and
much.
we want to we appreciate everybody for joining, and I'm going to actually bring up the evaluation layout. And if there is another couple questions, one or two maybe, if you want to stay on and hear the answer to those, feel free to do that. It's just 6 simple questions here in our evaluation. It's 6 polls, no submit button, just simply select your answers. That Excel spreadsheet that Arun was showing earlier, that for step 1, for that content asset inventory, that's available for download at the bottom left corner of your screen. Click on the name of the file, then click Download File button, and it will open up a separate web browser tab where you can download. We'll also have that posted with the recording. This session was recording and will be made available to anybody who registered for the event. Please give us 1 business day and you will receive an email. Anybody who registered will receive an email that will include a direct link to both the recording and this handout. So you're welcome to watch that recording again for all that great information. You're welcome to share that link with others as well. That will be posted up on the e-learning industry website. So with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Arun for any parting thoughts.
Thank you very much, Melissa, and thank you, Nolan, for chiming in. This was, a great experience for me, and my experience with all the companies wherever I have done these kind of modernization is that this is not an easy task, and typically there is a lot of factors that come into play, and it is after you do the initial analysis and do the content inventory. If you don't have a substantial team to actually go for it, you would need to look out and figure out what's other ways of doing these things. So probably consulting companies can help you in taking it to a logical completion. And thank you very much for all the people. And I know it's very late in the Eastern Hemisphere, and thank you very much for staying up late.